Thanks so much for being here. I'm Hillary Raimo, your host this evening, right here on Achieve Radio. I have a very exciting guest joining me tonight. We're going to be talking about bio shifts in consciousness and connecting the dots and what that means. John Riley joins me. He is a researcher of alternative energy and science and owner of 0 Point Research. His background is in top secret military projects, and he has up to 23 years in motion picture special effects, taking his knowledge and experience to a much greater level, and shares his discoveries with the world. He created 0 Point Research and is also the inventor and founder of the Lifestream Generator, and we'll be hearing all about that coming up this hour and much more. I have a personal connection to John, and some of you know who listen to me regularly that we were doing a Love Breathe Earth meditation in Egypt back in June on the 8th. And I had put an open call out to people who had been in the area, who might happen to be in Cairo. And John showed up with one of his friends, Barbara, from his journey through Egypt. He had taken a group, and the two of them were my companions inside the King's Chamber this past June. And we had an extraordinary experience, and we're going to be talking about that tonight too. And I'm really excited to hear John's version because we haven't quite had that conversation since we got together in Egypt, and I'm excited to hear all that he has going on. I would also love to know more about his inventions and his work. He reminds me of a modern day Tesla. And some of you know that I just returned from Tesla's room, spending the night at the Hotel New Yorker before we did our 9/11 meditation on the blood moon solar eclipse this past October. And I have some exciting news to announce before I bring John on the air. We did apply for an application to have Dr. Masaru Emoto's laboratories in Japan to analyze the water crystal of that meditation that was brought to the 9/11 site, spent the night in Tesla's room, and we were just thrilled to get those images back this week. And I have posted them, released and published them for the first time today, 11/6/2014 on the full moon, and you can find that on my blog, The Yin Factor, YIN, and you can take a look at the image for yourself and see what you think. It's very exciting. We're getting a tremendous amount of feedback on the image. People are just really excited to see it. It's got a fabulous story, and that story is told on that particular article, so you can find out what's this all about. So welcome, John. Thanks so much for joining me all the way from Santa Monica, California.
Thanks so much for having me, Hillary. It is an honor to be on your show.
I know. Why haven't we done this sooner? You know, I was thinking this. I'm like, how come John and I have never been on the air together? This is crazy.
It is kind of funny because we actually, I think we connected with each other about 8 years ago, if I recall, possibly 9. And, we had a synchronicity. We had a mutual friend, William Henry, and we were all kind of like connecting the dots with our Egypt information. And, when the time is right, the time is right. And it feels perfect today to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And actually, it was the perfect time to meet you in person in Egypt, of all places. And you had an extraordinary trip with a great group of people that you had just brought through. And you had some kind of piece of technology that you were still putting together as I was there for the week. And you had posted some pictures on Facebook. So I'm excited to hear about that, too. So where would you like to start?
Well, I guess we could start in Egypt because it was kind of great that while we were there and you were coordinating the global meditation, you got what we call the sounding call. And that is just this ringing to arrive, to the sacred land of Egypt. And it was pretty powerful because while I was cruising Facebook, I noticed that you were feeling this wave, and all of a sudden you realized I was there, and you said, and you started asking me the questions like, I have to come, is there room available and all this, and I knew, I said, yeah, she's definitely coming because you were not the only one that got that insatiable call. People just had to arrive. And that I found, fascinating, because I was there for 2 weeks. We just completed our tour. And that's all of a sudden. I was sitting there, for 2 more weeks, about ready to, get into some deeper research. And all of a sudden, it was just like a bell, a bell, a bell. I found out there was another group of people that just arrived, and I knew about 3 of them in the group, and we had no idea we were all going to be there at the same time. And then you show up, and it all just started to connect, which was very beautiful, and I would have to say multidimensionally fascinating.
Well, it was, and actually there's a little more to that story. I actually was told by Spirit to contact you before I even looked at your Facebook page and realized you were there and had a group. And it was amazing because when I went on your page, I said, oh my gosh, he's in Egypt, because you were posting pictures. So that's what started the conversation, from that point forward. It was a very clear, distinct call to reach out to you specifically. And you played a big part in the fact that I made up my mind to go. And then I was sponsored to go. The money was raised within 24 hours. People were just, oh yes, go, because the story was pretty fascinating on my end, I thought. And so we had this extraordinary synchronistic moment. And I ended up staying at the Mena House, and we connected on the 8th for the meditation. And then, it was just really fascinating how we all came together. And then inside the King's Chamber was just amazing. And I don't even know where to start with that, because you showed us a spot on the sarcophagus-like type box in there that some people think is a sarcophagus, and you kicked a spot on that, and you said, yes, this is the sweet spot. Why don't you get in, and I'll tone you? And we did, and I swear to God, I think you probably opened up the rest of the dimensions for me from that point forward. So tell me about that. So talk about this sweet spot inside of the King's Chamber. What's that all about, and how did you find it?
Well, we were, over the years, this was my 7th journey into Egypt in 7 years. This is my 5th year with bringing my own groups. And after, I always, try, because we can't stay too long. Normally, if you just go there, as if you go there daily, if you don't have private time, they try to get you out of there in about 15 or 20 minutes. So you have to pay, for private time. And we do this for each of our groups, is where we have 2 hours to ourselves. They only let our group in, and we could do whatever we want in there. So when we have that time, then we can really start to explore. So when we get into the King's Chamber, and when we're addressing the so-called coffer, we like to call it, instead of the sarcophagus. And one of the things is that I always observe how people, receive, that so-called coffer, and what they do in it. And we've had, ceremonies which are absolutely beautiful, where actually someone would lay in there, and we'll have the groups around them, and everyone will tone in to that person. And that's very transformative. On so many levels. Sometimes you can achieve very high altered states of consciousness. And then also when you tone in there yourself, it amplifies the resonance times 3. So when every year I always go a little bit deeper, because I've done this, I take it out, I check it off my list. And then all of a sudden, an associate of mine that was on our trip, we started to really, we had it to ourselves, and we got in there and we started doing different tones. And while he was toning in there, I kept moving around. And then all of a sudden I found what we call one of those sweet spots that was very different. And then he walked over, and he took his fist and he thumped a particular area, actually diagonally opposite of where I was. And I just looked at that and I said, "Did you hear that?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "That resonated the whole chamber." And just from my fist hitting the solid stone on the coffer. And I said, "Okay." And all of a sudden I just looked at it and I followed diagonally, and I started going down, and all of a sudden I found even a deeper tone, and my fist could only do so much, and I didn't want, we didn't have anything to really sound in there, so I stood up and I just kicked gently. I was wearing rubber sole shoes, and I kicked in that spot, and when I hit that perfect spot, the whole chamber vibrated in an ultra low tone. And it was very interesting, because one of the guards there came running up, the hall, and came in, was wondering what was going on, and we're just standing there, and so he turns around, and when he turns around, I did it again, and he looks up, and he feels the whole place vibrating, and he looks looks back at us, and we're just standing there. So it was kind of funny, because we couldn't do that measurement. He was on the opposite side, and we were on, behind, the coffer, and doing this toning or this striking, and we needed his response. And it was funny because he couldn't tell where it was coming from. And
it's fascinating.
That was really fascinating.
It's fascinating because when you did it for us, for Barbara and I, we were standing there, and it was amazing. The entire chamber lit up in a sound. It was one single tone that just went right through the whole place. And Absolutely. Then when we laid inside, it was even more profound because it went through the body. And then you got in. So what did you experience when you felt your own discovered kind of tone go through your own body?
Well, it affects us all differently, and that's what's very interesting. For me, I was actually subduing the response that day, and I'll have to admit it because I was kind of at my I would have to say my saturation of energy by the time you arrived there. So I didn't want to trigger anything else because I was just trying to manage what I was going through. And we could talk about that in depth a little bit later in the show if you'd like, because you mentioned about the devices that I work on and that we construct. And so that was a real, high level aspect of it. But when we tone in there ourselves but when we have that external vibration that happens, it's moving every molecule within our body, and that's one of the things about this acoustical chamber known as the King's Chamber, is that it is a perfectly acoustical device. And of course, when we look at it, now when we see this coffer that has a broken edge and there's no top to it, and of course there's absolutely no hieroglyphics in there whatsoever, we have to realize that this was meant for something else. This was doing something a lot deeper than just housing, a pharaoh or a king, from ancient times, because when we found those places, in the Valley of the Kings or different, temples, they're full of garb of who resides there. So of course we all know this, and we have to start looking at it deeper. So we do these energy tests in there where, in my research, I bring these quantum field technologies. And what's always amazing is that it's always perplexing because I do very thorough energy measurements, and I bring meters. And when we have it privately, I'm able to bring the stuff in that I require for this. And I do outside field measurements first, and I check the technologies and I look at their emissions and their durations of how they work. Because they're on batteries and they only run a certain amount of time. And so then I take them into the King's Chamber, and it breaks all the rules. I take them into the pit, it breaks all the rules. And so like what would normally run for 15 minutes outside of any of the grid structures in Egypt, I take it into the King's Chamber, and it would only run for 3 minutes. But it would run exponentially. The field measurement, if we were measuring something that put out a 5-foot diameter field, when we take it into the King's Chamber, it would expand to 20 to 25 feet, just because we're in this amplification device.
So what brought you onto this path of going down into the rabbit hole, if you will, of technology? Where did you start with the background, with top military projects, motion picture business with special effects? Where did you take the turn onto alternative energy technology and really making it come to life?
Well, that arc, it actually started, I would have to say it started in 1979, and that's actually when I took this special orientation at Lockheed Aircraft in Burbank. And it was a 5-day orientation, 8 hours a day, no pay, no guarantee of a job. You had to be there at 7 o'clock, and you had to do the due diligence. You had to take all these tests, and they put you through the paces. And so it started out with about 65 people, and by day 3 it was down to 28. So people were dropping like flies. And then on the 4th day they started getting into the advanced orientations. And I looked at it, and my mind was able to figure it out. On that day, they said, okay, John, you're leaving. And everyone was kind of aghast because, I thought I was going to go the 5 days. And he goes, oh, no, you're going into processing. Congratulations, you're the first one. And but then he took me outside, and he says, I want you to know you stick out like a sore thumb. And when you get there, take this, and when you go down the corridor, go left, follow the skunk, don't go right. And so I followed the skunk, which was the ADP, which is the Advanced Development Projects, and they immediately started processing me for a top secret clearance. So it's almost like all these military structures have, if the first 1, 2, or 3 people in these orientations get selected for the high level projects. And so once I was in there, it took about 6 months, to get my top secret. And the briefing is, it's a briefing you never forget for the rest of your life. They sit you down, they say everything you've been doing for the last 6 months is what you will tell everyone for the rest of your life. You will not talk about what you do in here. And having, being a kid, and being able to explore after about a year and a half, I started getting my own abilities, and I was running my own lab because of my aptitude. And so it was really interesting. So I had these technologies that were before me, and at times I was able to experiment with them. And we're talking about, these are frequency generators. I'm not disclosing anything that's vital to security on this planet, but they one of the things that the military has the ability is to understand electricity at a much farther level than most people on this planet would ever do. And so they had these generators that we could dial from 60 hertz, which is the standard alternating current frequency that the North America generates, but we can turn it all the way up to 800 hertz, or 800 cycles. And that's kind of unheard of. Those are very rare devices to find these. And so I would always do these experiments. And when I started getting up to about, over 400 hertz, the interesting phenomenon started happening, what the standard devices I would plug them into and measuring them. But I realized the ultra efficiency that was coming out of them. And one of the greatest days is when I got electrocuted, by a 400 cycle to, 220 volt device. And it ran through my entire body. Now, what happened on that moment is that it did not disrupt me. All of a sudden, I became very awake. And that moment was imprinted on me very clearly. And I still, to this day, I remember, the time, it was like 2:42 on the clock. I can actually, remember the day. But it was like, and what I was wearing. And that's how imprinted this moment was. And it also reminded me to take a mental note of this. Because this will serve me later on in my life. So I was always, pushing and getting the engineers, to talk about this technology and how we can implement it in the world and how it would change things for such greater good. And they said, no one's going to do that. You don't know what you're asking for. You want to change the entire infrastructure. So after about 3.5 years, I realized my time was done at Lockheed, and I kept asking myself, where would I be well suited? And I was always into science fiction growing up. And I started building these gizmos with electronics that no one else really had. And I started, going through the motion picture industry and showing my wares. And they said, yeah, we'll hire you. They really liked what I did. And I was able to just, develop, these props or electronic circuits that the movies wanted. And so it was really interesting. Like one of my first movies coming out was Cocoon. And it's really funny, how that kind of bridges, the work that I'm doing today. Maybe we can explain that a little bit later in the show here.
Yeah. So you worked on the movie Cocoon, huh?
Yes. Yeah. And if anyone remembers what that is, it was kind of about the fountain of, like the fountain of youth or the pool of youth, that the aliens were regenerating the ones that they had to leave on the planet. They had these special, pods and these devices that were actually cut out of the original film, so you didn't understand the life force energy that they were putting in the water. And the senior center, next door, and how they, broke in and would use the pool, and they were getting revitalized. Mm. So that arc, of that implantation kind of led me to what I'm doing today. Is about that longevity or quality of life level of understanding that Nikola Tesla completely understood, tried to give it to the world, but people could not grasp it back then. So now here we are, working to return that to the world in a level of grace, not, in aggression. We're doing this very slowly, methodically, carefully and showing people what happens when we bring these energies back, to the surface.
So you mentioned when you were a child that you were interested in this. And so when did Nikola Tesla enter your life? What age were you?
Well, I was always surrounded by Nikola Tesla because in the special effects world, people always used it as a reference. Mm-hmm. All the movies when we worked on. But when did
you start to take on the actual research of his work?
Oh, well, I started working in high voltage back actually in junior high. I was in, I had an aptitude in electronics, and I was going for the high voltage, the Tesla coils. And people were like, what the heck is this? And we were building little Tesla coils. And then in high school, when I started, I took electronics, and they said, well, you're a sophomore, you can only take, beginning electronics. And I'm like, no, I don't want to take beginning electronics. So I went to the teacher and I said, hey, is there a test so I can go into advanced? And he looks at me, he says, yeah, right. And he goes, okay. And he gave me this really complicated test, but I got about 7 out of 10 right. And he goes, okay, yeah, definitely. You can go into the advanced. And, so we started building things, and that was my projects. That's how I got graded. And, and teachers would bring in their radios and their TVs, and I'd repair them, and he'd get the bottle of Jack Daniels or whatever it was for the exchange, for fixing them. But Nikola Tesla, I was always fascinated by him growing up. And so I didn't. And then after a certain time, after I left Lockheed, I kind of went back to sleep, and it's a little hard to talk about, the entire arc of my life and what got me here. But keep in mind, when I was at Lockheed, within a year and a half, I was at a labor grade 18. That was the highest blue badge, which is an hourly labor grade that you could achieve. You'd have to go into a salary position to go any higher. So I set a record at my age there. And it's still there if anyone ever wanted to look it up.
I'm interested also, John, how that military background has, affected you throughout your journey since. Has it kind of followed you around? Has it given you any problems in the areas that you go into?
No, not at all, because the nice thing about the freedom of the motion picture industry is that, people approach you and they say, can you do this? And that's when I first opened up my own company, because I was working for a lot of, different movies, and the special effects people would hire me to do certain things that they couldn't do, and I would always say, yeah, I could do that, and they say, you sure? Because no one else could do it. And so when Back to the Future 2 was being developed, they found me out in my little corner out in the valley, and they said, yeah, we hear you do electronics. I go, yeah, I do. And they said, yeah, can you do this? Because our best effects guys say it can't be done the way the director wants it. And I studied it, and I said, yeah, we could do it. And he goes, you sure? Because everyone else says it's impossible. He wants 30-year in the future technology. And I'm looking at it, I said, well, I work with developmental chips and research. I said, I'm pretty sure we could pull that off. And he goes, are you sure? Because they were totally doubting, here's this kid in this corner in the valley saying he could do what everyone else says can't be done. And they said, well, if you can do it, we want it. And I gave them the price. They said, can you do it in 6 weeks? I'm like, yikes. They go, is it going to be expensive? I go, yes. And so I gave them the price, and they said, okay, we want two. So, we had the resources to develop this next level technology. And it was one of the greatest days of my life is when we went on the first day of shooting, and Robert Zemeckis just did the dailies, the camera tests with our device. And he came out, and I was holding it, and he's pointing at me. He goes, did you do this? And this guy's like about 6 inches taller than I am. And he's like yelling, with his finger pointing. And I'm like, yes. And he goes, fantastic work. I just got out of dailies. The thing looks amazing. And he starts getting technical. He goes, how did you sync it to camera? And and then, all of a sudden we got distracted, and they called him back on set. He goes, I got to go, but thank you so much. And I was standing there, and I said, I don't think it gets any better than this. And then I look over to the left, and Steven Spielberg sitting in his executive producer director's chair, and he gives me the nod.
Nice.
I said, okay,
well,
this
that's
is
good. It's a good
yeah,
story. And so then
yeah.
you invented something called the Lifestream Generator, and that's on your website at zeropointresearch.com. And so when people go to that and they look through your website, it's very technical. Give us the layman's background on this generator and what it is and why it's become kind of your focal point.
Well, one of the things that when I got back in after, I spent my time in the industry, I started dabbling back into my research. And one of the things that always intrigued me it was the messages that Nikola Tesla talked about is these ethereal energy fields and he created a platform. And he said, when you stand on it, all your wrongs will be righted. And so that really stuck with me, and I was really trying to understand, because this is part of his radiant energy research and understanding, and to generate wireless energy, throughout the world, and what Wardenclyffe represented. So his Colorado Springs research was fantastic, was amazing, and I was able to get a lot of his research. They put out a Colorado Springs research book, and I was able to find one of those, in the archives and really go through it, and I started understanding the principles. But then I stumbled upon George Van Tassel, which was actually another person who really focused on the same level of work, and he created a structure out in Landers, California, called the Integratron. And what the Integratron was actually going to be was a cellular rejuvenator for mankind. And he spent over 20 years constructing this. And a lot of people said that he received information from alien craft, these aliens that came down near the Giant Rock area. And, but they didn't give him anything. All that they did is they showed him the Earth's principles of how to, to benefit mankind, because they said, we're amazing beings, but our bodies are fragile. And so they wanted to give this gift of this rejuvenation that would allow us to live in our optimum quality. So, and Nikola, I realized I started putting that together, and it led me back to Nikola Tesla again, from George Van Tassel's work. And once I went to the Integratron and spent, 24 hours there, I had the answers that I needed. I understood what he was going to etherically inducing natural energies of the earth by creating a static or dirod array. Not to get too technical, but there was no electronics in there at all, and it was all air powered. This dirod array was going to be floating on a bed of air and rotating. He had 4 earth rods, these lightning type rods in the 4 planes of the earth, very very similar to what the ancients were doing to accumulate energy. It got really interesting. So, I promised that within 6 months I'd build a prototype and bring this energy field forth. And the owners of the structure said, good luck, we've been hearing that for 15 years. And I said, no, it's going to happen. And within 6 months, I brought a little black box, one of the things that I immediately knew that if my calculations are correct, when I bring this and put it in the center of the Integratron, this should amplify exponentially, and it did. And so we were in this unified field of energy, and everyone just had smiles on their face. Everyone just realized, they go, wow, you're doing something here. I feel so good. And that's when it really started to click for me. And I said, okay, this is what I'm here to do. My research is going to be this and pretty much only this, until we can bring this forth to the world. So the live streams themselves, when we call them radiant energy, it actually goes back to Nikola Tesla's understanding of radiant energy harnessing, and that is a binding etherical energy, which could also be considered within the 0 point field or the unified field. And when we bring it forth, what happens within our human selves is that we go into a homeostasis within the mind and body. And that's always a fascinating thing. We've worked with thousands of people around the world for 9 years. And when we put people in this energy, if they're really stressed out within 5 or 10 minutes, they look like a totally different person. They're completely calm and relaxed. And I always ask the question, can you think of anything negative while you're in the field? Most people just start laughing. They go, I can't even go there in my mind. And then when they try, they laugh even more. And that's what I knew something was really going on, is that when you could not induce a negative thought. Some people were really good at, invoking negative thoughts, and they were able to do it, and you can really feel it. But that's a rare person that's holding on to so much. But the normal person, 75, 80% of the people walked away with such an incredible state of well-being. So we started to research this, we started putting the technologies around the world over the last 9 years, and with fascinating results with clinics in France, in Italy, and Australia, and they've been working with the technologies for nearly 9 years, and they said this recharges the human cell system. They have the results, over the long period of time. And I knew, we had to apply to cellular science, and it was about bending the rules, but not breaking the rules of our physical existence, on this planet. So this is where it gets fascinating. It's all about the quality of life, is being able to do what you want to do, no stagnations, no blockages in the mind and body, just quality of life. And that's the key thing, behind my research.
So do people come to you for sessions? Do you build them for people and sell them? How do you get the technology out to people who are interested in using it?
Each technology is made to order. Now, this is something that's always been intriguing, because it is intentional technology. When someone finds, and it's all word of mouth. We don't really advertise. If you find our website, you found it because someone referred you to it. And we do have a Lifestream Generator page on Facebook that gives you an introduction to it. Now, one of the key things, this is something you're going to love, is that each one of these devices that we make has a lost technology understanding that's embedded in it. We cannot build this with our current technology understandings with solid state, with the silicon. We had to go back in time to 1883 to understand the principles of energy harnessing on this level. And each device that I use, I've been searching the world for years. I have a warehouse of all these esoteric components, and the last time these were made was in 1944. So I have boxes, of these units that have been sitting, when I pull them out, and I show them to people, the newsprint, they were actually dated 1942, 43, or 44, and you can actually read the, history. So that, again, this device is the key understanding to be able to generate radiant energy, because it has to happen when we bring it forth, when it's an electromotive and a high voltage field. There's a phenomenon that happens. We call it the tri-field phenomenon, and we put it in a hermetically sealed chamber, and we generate something very similar to a lightning storm. And then when we do it, and then when we emit it, we generate what is considered a radiant energy field, a tangible field of energy. So yes, they're all intentional technologies. They're made to order. And we have about 550 of them out there in the world in 23 different countries.
And do you turn them all on at the same time? You guys have some kind of coordinated efforts where you turn them on and buzz the planet?
It's really funny you mentioned that. I'm not laughing at you. I'm smiling because yes, you get it. And one of the things that we understand is that, we had to plant the seeds. And so we developed these small generators that are excellent for people, like the standard person. We have one that you could travel with. It fits in a carry-on case. And people, I have people that travel all over the world with them. And and then we have large ones. We have these huge towers that are over 7 feet tall that generate, 50 feet of energy that's perfect for 100 people. And it's amazing when you're in these fields with all other human beings, experiencing this energy. We're all just on this wavelength that is almost impossible to explain, but it's a rarity that could be maintained on that level. So we have 5 different models that we introduce, because every time, because we do have people out there that love the experience, but then they're dealing with more deeper physical challenges. So we build larger yield energies that really help to right the cellular system. When you recharge the human cell structure, almost everyone in the Western and the scientific world realizes lack of health is lack of energy. Pathways in the body are being diminished. They're blocked. They're not getting the normal energy. And our cells will transmute into a negative cell a low millivolt, and then they're not healthy, and they could be transmuted into what is considered a cancerous cell. So when we recharge them, when they're in this energy field, then they get top-loaded. They get charged again. They go into a saturation effect. And the cells just, they're drinking from this fountain, or as we would call it, the life stream. And the scientific evidence is there to show that it does recharge our human system. And when that happens, then we immediately start to live in a higher quality of life. It might take, 6 months or 6 years for a person to get the full effect of it, but that's okay. If you've been on this planet for 40 or 50 years, and if it would take you from, let's say, 6 months to 6 years to reset the clock and to go back 10 or 15 years in the quality of your life, that's not a bad thing. So we follow a rule of thumb, the cellular science, because we live in a temporal arc of everyday existence. We're here on a day-to-day basis. So if we start to break those rules and we start to amplify these fields or take them up to a very high yield, the person's experience could end up being not very pleasant, because what you start doing, you start to remove them from the matrix. All of a sudden, what you've been used to your entire life, seeing a bandwidth of the color of the rainbow, and all of a sudden your consciousness allows you to perceive beyond that. If you do that over a graceful period of time, which takes me back to Egypt, into the understanding of the ancient mystery schools, and how most people were in this 7-year cycle, to become a high priest or a high priestess. So it has to be honed. It has to be on the daily basis, because if we bend that rules, then we can start to really become, moving too fast, and then all of a sudden you have no relation to everyone else, and that could be a difficult way, to navigate through this life.
So Egypt for you, when you went for the first time, what was the motivation behind that, and how was that experience for you?
Yeah, well, that's kind of interesting. Is that when I built the first prototype, and you're going to find this very interesting, and you'll probably get it as well. When I built the prototype, there was such a huge confirmation in just my conscious shift, and then the next morning I woke up, and right when I was in the waking life, the Eye of Horus was floating in my mind's eye. And I knew it. I've seen it before. I go, oh, that's the Eye of Ra. That was in the movie Stargate that we worked on, blah, blah, blah. But then I said, wait a minute, but that doesn't seem right. It was just floating there, and it just kept bugging me. And so I went on, and I started, with the Eye of Ra, and then I ended up with the Eye of Horus, and it took me all the way back into the ancient understandings of what the symbolism really meant. And when we get into the understanding of what it is, it's the eye that that symbolism that promotes wisdom, health, and safety. And so I realized that was the intentional programming that each one of these technologies would have to have in it. Would have to have the same understanding of this ancient knowledge, is to bring wisdom, health, and safety. So it can't be used out of balance. So this was really fascinating, and all of a sudden all the dots were connecting to Egypt. And one day I went into this profound realization, and I just said, I got to go to Egypt. And I called up William Henry, and I said, you got room on your next trip? He goes, I sure do. I said, I'm on there. I didn't even know where we were going, and I just sent him the money. I got off the plane. They picked me up. I was in a hotel, and I was in an altered state of consciousness from that moment on. All I knew is I had to put my feet on the ground of this sacred land. And I had no itinerary, no plans, nothing. But there was a little bit more to it. There was like a vision that kind of was floating around for 2 years before during the implementation, of my research. And that was one of the first dots that I connected on my path when I set foot back into the ancient lands.
And then when you fast forward to this summer, June, you were working on, or you had brought with you a piece of technology to Egypt with you. Let's get into that and talk about that, because I was there to kind of, I don't think I saw it, but I did see it in a picture that you posted when I got back, because you ended up staying there longer. And I was very curious about that. So can you kind of fast forward to now and tell us what that's all about?
Yes, absolutely. Well, each year I always bring a new technology and we research it. So I have a collection of technologies that sit there for me in Egypt, which is great because I bring them, then I don't have to, I never bring them back. And so when I get there, my Egyptian family there, they pull it all out for me and we start to experiment. So, but what we did this year, we were actually working on the JED project, which is the ancient symbolism of this missing technology. So the JED is DJED, if anybody wants to look that up. And you'll see that it's a pillar. And if you look at the pillar and then you go to our website, zeropointresearch.com, you will notice that we have a column that is very similar to what the JED represents. And, when we started connecting the dots, when we started seeing like the high priests and priestess standing in front of these JED pillars holding their hands up. And then when a very interesting coincidence is when we generate the consciousness towers of the Lifestream, we stand there with our hands up, just like these priests and priestesses do. And so we're receiving this energy. We're receiving the Sikkim, which is the life force that the ancients understood, and that is of all things, the Sikkim, which is the life force. So when I took it to the next level, when I got my feet on the ground, I went to see my Egyptian friends, and we sat down and we spec'd out a JED. And we figured out what materials we wanted to use and how high, and it was going to sit on top of this device. And so the guys immediately went to work on it. About 3 weeks later, it was complete. I was done with our trip, and we got back, and we finished, and we started to assemble it. And so we did our research with it, and it was very fascinating because once we started putting that geometry together, which is known as the backbone of Osiris. And when we understand what that energy represents, so when we attach these natural elements that are only found in Egypt, the red granite, the limestone, and the basalt, when we started to create using the three considered non-conductive elements, on the device, and when we turned it on, it activated a very unique field. And what was really interesting is that it was doing the same effect that would happen in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, is that it would amplify and kept amplifying until it blew the technology out. And I was totally fascinated. And any elements that we put on this, like from quartz to the alabaster, the technology would just run and run and run. But when we put the JED, when it was constructed, the phenomenon happened within 5 to 6 minutes. It just kept building and building and building. And it created a very huge field in the room. And we did videotape it. I have some of those videos on my YouTube channel. So, yeah.
Have you done any work with Christopher Dunn? John, have you worked with Christopher Dunn and his theory on the Giza power plant? Have you two kind of had a conversation yet?
No, actually we haven't. But what is really interesting is that, what really activated me, again, it's one part of my transitions, is that when I got out of special effects, I was in motion picture production. I had a production company, but then I opened up a DVD company, a manufacturing company. And I had a library from UFO TV, and it just so happens we converted Chris Dunn's projects that were on VHS. We put them on DVD and repackaged them and got them out there. So Stephen Mailer, the same thing, all these people, all these names, William Henry, that's how William Henry and I met, is that when I got this client, the first thing they gave me to try me was William Henry's Cloak of the Illuminati. And so William, for a year, knew me as his DVD graphics guy. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, I said, "Hey, William, how you doing? It's John." He goes, "Good. How you doing?" I go, "Good." I said, "Hey, you sitting down?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I have a very unusual story to tell you. And you're going to be needing to be sit down when I tell you." And so it was great. I got to explain it to him. He's like, "Okay." He was very open-minded, and he got it, and we connected. I presented the technology here in Santa Monica to the public first, and we had him as our first guest at the center when we were doing it. And I introduced him to the technologies, and he wrote up on it. I think he still has it on his website if you go to williamhenry.net. And or just do a search on the internet for Lifestream Generator. William Henry does come up and talks about his experience in it. So that's how we became friends. Over almost 9 years ago, 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I met you through Mary Lamondo was my friend at the time. She was operating
yes.
Williams Tours at that point in time. So,
right.
It's kind of interesting how we all synchronistically find each other. And have you found that in your work over the years, that synchronicity and those types of experiences, as well as the intuitive mind especially for a man who's very technical, you're very advanced in the mathematics and stuff. How do you balance the intuitive mind, the feminine within, the divine female aspects that really I believe help guide you through it? And I'm sure you're aware of that also, because you seem to be one of the few that really do kind of go into that intuitive mind and really aren't afraid of exposing that to the public. Seems to be kind of a stigma for some that they don't want, they want the theories, they want the formulas, they want that formula type mathematical thing. But when it comes to the intuitive, unknowing mysteries type thing, they just don't really quite get it. How does that work into your work, the way you do it? Because you do it very well.
That's very sweet of you to say that. Doing it well. Well, of course, when we shift our consciousness, and this level of technology definitely does that on so many levels. It creates I guess a thirst for knowledge. And I was actually, if I recall, at the age of 12, I chose to be a seeker of origin. I wanted to know the truth of things. And I wouldn't just accept what was being told to me and forced on me as what was truth. And if it didn't feel right, I chose to keep going. So in my life, I made many decisions, when I was in the illusions, and all of a sudden, as a gift, I was brutally removed from those illusions. And then I didn't realize that was creating an awakening. And sometimes an awakening can be beautiful. It could also be rude, but it's an awakening nonetheless. So when it's rude, of course, that means that we're so inert in it, and we believe, we're holding on to this belief, but then our frequency shows us otherwise. It's like you're holding on, it's time to release that, and if you don't let go, well, the laws of our own attraction, of our own purpose, is going to implement this drastic change for you. And so that's why, we see some people go through a powerful awakening after tragedies or something that they never imagined, that happened in their lives, divorces or, whatever, a loss of a loved one, could trigger this, because all of a sudden it just rewrites us, because we go into the deep core of ourselves. So that, I started to become a seeker, and I started going into these ancient, when I went into India, I didn't go to the tourist areas. I went deep into the spiritual kept knowledge, that hasn't been touched for 6,000 years. And when I had those profound experiences happen, when I met these profound beings, that are considered superhuman, they've achieved these high levels, and they're not there to dominate us. They're there to show us, for the ones who are open, to realize what we are capable of. You don't have to take on the exact same abilities they have. Here's a multitude of them. Which one suits you the best. Now, once that comes in to you, you could either be a prophet and you can force that on people in a belief, or you can truly represent that change and work within yourself to break the old binding structures that no longer apply, and to embrace this knowledge that has been revealed to you. And then we walk in that. And so that's my everyday commitment, is to do this.
Well, I find it really fascinating that you have such a wide background of interesting connects that go all the way up to the current moment. And, you have a new thing out called the Inoculus. Do you want to talk about that before we get down towards the end of the show? Because I have one and I love it. So I can't wait for you to share it with everybody.
Yeah, well, the Oculus is new to you, but it's actually not that new actually, because that was very interesting, because that on my first journey to Egypt I realized that I was going to be bringing back some alchemy, and all I knew was that once I arrived there, I'd be returning with these alchemical elements. And when I got there, it all started to reveal itself. I knew I had to bring the white alabaster, the calcite, which is the highest of the sacred altars is made out of this white alabaster. And it is one of the most amazing elements that I have actually ever worked with. It's an incredible zero-state alchemy. And why the ancients used it is because it actually is a zero-point element. And it absorbs energy on so many levels. It just takes energy in, and it never really gives it back unless you understand how to get it to release. So they would build these 50, 100-ton structures made out of this. But then when we go over to it and we take two pieces and tap them together, it dissolves instantly, and it turns into this fine powder. So understanding the alchemy to be able to carve that, to keep it in one unified piece, and then, to tap it and have it turn into this powder that almost everyone, when I put it in their hands, wants to eat it. It just called the body. The body just calls for it. It's absolutely amazing. That was one that I knew I was bringing back. The next one being the generations oils. And I went on this pursuit for 4 years until I found the true oils that I was looking for. And we found, a couple of years ago, buried in the earth, blue lotus oil that was sitting in a vessel buried on this property. The first time it was done was 185 years prior. The last time the vessel was opened was 32 years before that. And we opened it up and we found about 8 ounces of this blue, it was indigo in color, lotus. And when you touch it, when you smell it, it just vibrates your entire being. It's absolutely amazing to experience. And that's in each one of these amulets. And then we also have the water from the Osirion in Abydos, which I think you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. And then also the living algae that resides in this water, because that water it's not Nile seepage. It comes from an ancient aquifer, and that water comes from what I call core of the earth. It constantly is seeping up in there, but they can never find where it's truly coming from. But in my research, it's one of the highest frequency waters I've ever experienced. If I take a drop of that and put it on people's foreheads or on the top of their crown, they will argue with me that I put more than water on their head.
And I love that it's shaped like a little light bulb. It's got the light bulb shape to it, so people can go. Now, what do you suggest people would want to wear this for? I mean, when somebody says, well, what does it do? Or if they're curious and they're hearing us talk about it, what would you tell them would be its use for modern day?
That's perfect, because what was great about it is that when I constructed them and put all the elements together, I stood there and I held it, and all of a sudden I heard Oculus. I went, Oculus, okay, and I looked it up, and the closest the understanding of it was Latin, meaning lens. And so I realized that it was a lens to a higher level of knowing, and it was an ancient alchemy that can only be combined from the ancient land. We did put 24 karat gold, which doesn't come from Egypt. I get it from another source, but that's the only element that is not from Egypt that is combined in these. So how I found out what they did is that I made 13 of them. I wore one and I distributed 12 to people close to me. And I said, can you do me a favor? Can you wear these, at least for a minimum of 3 days, but most importantly, sleep with them, and then report back to me on what your experience is. So the next morning when I gave it to a friend of mine, he calls me up and he goes, I don't know what this is, but when I woke up and realized it was a dream, I started to cry. He goes, I want to go back there so bad. He goes, what is this? he goes, John, what is this? And I'm like, you're telling me. And I'm writing it down. I said, thank you for sharing that. He was emotional. He says, I've never had a dream that clear before. And I started getting the same results, from about 8 people. And some people said, well, my dreams were too intense. I had to take it off. And so I wrote that down too. And then studying, being the observer of each person, how they lived their lives here and what they were dealing with in that subconscious or superconsciousness. So once all the research was in, I realized that it was an amplification tool to connect us to our superconsciousness, especially in our dream states. If you talk to many of the people that wear them, will tell you how their dreams take on a whole different defining. They find more stabilization. They could see clearly in the people's eyes in the dream states. They have articulate conversations. So it's really amazing. And within the 3-day cycle is because of the living elements, is that the algae and the water vibrates to our frequency, and it amplifies, our bioelectric field.
Well, you want one, you can go to zeropointresearch.com and you can order one. And I can tell you that everything John just said is true. I have experienced it myself. I've been wearing mine. When did I get mine? I believe I got it after the blood moon eclipse. In fact, John, it was one of the first things, it was the first thing that I got after I came back from that moment. So it was very special. And since then, I've been wearing it and I've had some very extraordinary experiences. So that's great. Now, what is your vision for the world? I mean, you come out with all of this, you talk about all of it, you're very passionate, you're extremely knowledgeable about it. What do you do for fun, and what do you see the world doing? Where are we going? What's your vision? Kind of quick sort of ending the show type thing, but I'd like to end it on that note because I think that's important to understand how someone who has your ability of mind can bridge the heart into all of that and what the bigger picture is.
Well, I guess the one that I will answer for you, I can't get into my fun and all that, but I do have 2 wonderful children that I always, prioritize my life and spend time with them. But what the world is going into, and one of the things that we can definitely see in this arc of realization is that almost everything that is subdued is now coming to the surface. And in this shift in paradigm of consciousness, all of it has to reveal itself. We have the truth, the lies or the subduction or the subdued will no longer have a place to hide. So it's all coming to the surface. We're seeing this on profound levels. And that's when we can truly make the conscious choice that this no longer has a benefit for us. We saw this in the revolutions of Egypt, how, we see this from the Occupy Wall Street movement, how revolutions happen. But when they happen on a higher consciousness, people just stand up and they go, no more.